Hey, everybody here and everybody in the Zoom land. I'm going to act like y'all are all glued to your device watching us right now. It is my distinct pleasure to have the opportunity to both introduce as well as talk with my colleague, Professor Lisa Biggs, about this, her very first book. For those of you who have not had the opportunity to hold your book baby the first time, you spend like a decade thinking about, working on, revising, holding tight to, loving and hating at the same time, this thing that we are here to celebrate today. And it is a joy to be able to do it here with you all and with Lisa. Professor Biggs is an actor, a playwright, and a performance studies scholar. This is her first book, as I just said, Healing Stage: Black Women, Incarceration, and the Art of Transformation. It investigates the impact of theater programs for women incarcerated in the U.S. and in South Africa. Prior to joining us here at Brown in 2018, Professor Biggs served as an assistant professor at Michigan State University, where she had a long career as an actor and a playwright. Her stage credits include productions at the Kennedy Center, Arena Stage, Living Stage Theater Company, ETA Creative Arts Foundation, Woolly Mammoth, and Looking Glass Theater. Her original stage plays have been produced at the National Black Theater Festival, Lynx Hall, Shadowbox Theater, Cultural Odyssey, the New York Hip Hop Theater Fest, DC Art Center, and the Baltimore Theater Project. Her creative work and scholarship have been supported by numerous grants and fellowships, including from Brown Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, our host today, the DC Arts Council, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Ellen Stone Bellick Foundation. Her most recent play, After Life, tells the story of how women and girls lit up and lived through the 1967 Detroit Rebellion, and it was awarded a 2017 Knight Foundation Detroit Arts Challenge grant. Please join me in welcoming Professor Biggs.
I'm going to show slides. Thank you, Professor Rooks, for that generous introduction, and thank you to everyone at the CSREA. Thank you everyone who's on Zoom and here in the room today. It is really my honor and my privilege to be able to be here. As Noliwe said, it has been a journey. It has been a journey that I've not walked alone, not by any stretch. I want to do a few thanks. First and foremost, of course, to the women whose work I was allowed to observe, and to the theater companies and the corrections officers who let me into their spaces, who invited me into their homes, who let me have dinner with them or just hang out. You'll know that, I should say from the beginning that in order to protect the identity of the incarcerated women at the heart of this study, that I use pseudonyms throughout the book, and that will be the case here today. Incarceration carries a huge and long-lasting, deeply impactful stigma. And so I'm going to, I have in the book and will today not refer to anyone by their real name, by a street name, by an alias or a nickname. That includes the women at the center of the study, as well as the places where it occurred, their theater companies, even the people who facilitated the programs. The only exception to that is my conversation or discussion about Rhodesia Jones's work in South Africa, which was widely and enthusiastically, lovingly supported by the Department of Corrections there. So much so that we actually got to do a show in the public sphere. And so in that instance, I'll refer to people by their first names because they were published in the media. But I want to thank E. Patrick Johnson, Anna Maria Jimenez Moreno, Elizabeth Zaleski, and the entire staff of the Ohio State University Press for shepherding the book. I also want to thank everyone here at Africana Studies, especially you, Noliwe, and Brian Meeks, for your vision and support. The CSREA, Tricia, Ellie, Caitlin, Stephanie, and Trey. Thank you so much. The book manuscript workshop that we did, gosh, I don't remember what year that was, but it broke open this whole project and helped me see to the finish. My colleagues at Michigan State University, to Austin Jackson, my loving spouse who has read every single word I have ever written. God bless you. And to some of the folks who I met in the field who really helped me understand what they meant by a theater practice that was a healing. And they include Kathy Randalls, Asetua Moraman-Kun, the graduates of the LCIW, or Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, Cheryl Cahey, Lisa Wagner-Carolla, Jacob Kaufman, Imani and Lorna, Angie and Rosetta, all those folks at Crossing the River, and at the Living Stage Theater Company. Rodessa Jones, Rajni Munsami, Idris Akamor, and the whole crew of the Medea Project as well. Thank you for letting me hang out. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the healing stage, Black women, incarceration, and the art of transformation. But I wanted to kind of first begin by setting a little context. So the story of Black women's incarceration, we usually think about it as beginning in the late 1980s. But really the long story of Black women's mass incarceration, I argue, begins with the founding of the country. The very first jails and prisons erected here in the late 1700s, right after the Revolution, they were overpopulated by Black women, low-income women, enslaved and formerly enslaved women, who were largely held for crimes of poverty, so allegedly stealing from an employer, being in public without a pass, for running away, those kinds of things. In some cases, people were also incarcerated for inappropriate or lewd behavior. But the overwhelming majority were behind bars for truly crimes of poverty, for offenses that the nation was trying to police in order to create a public sphere. The story of Black women's mass incarceration and their healing also begins in those sites. Because from the beginning, despite the degrading images, the stereotypes about them as lazy, unproductive, or more recently in the 1980s, 1990s, those images of crack hoes struggling to survive, people who didn't deserve our kindness, our care, that Black women have always fought against these mischaracterizations, the slander, the degradation, and worked really, really hard to create spaces for themselves and for those that they love. So, but the usual story that we tell about mass incarceration in the United States, which is the backdrop for the book, is that it begins in 1980, soon after Reagan is in office. But I want to introduce to you a much longer story. And in the book, I do start way back in the 1780s. Today, I'm just going to talk about 1970. In 1970, there were less than 7,000 women confined in state and federal prisons and in local jails across the country. In fact, in many municipalities, there were no women at all on any given night. That statistic changed dramatically during the 1980s with the introduction of the war on drugs. Between 1980 and 2015, the number of women behind bars skyrocketed more than 800%. More than 800%. That is almost twice the rate of the increase in the number of men behind bars at the same time under the war on drugs. We usually talk about the impact of the war on drugs on men, and it's important that we do. They constitute 90% of the people behind bars. But in erasing or ignoring or overlooking the experiences of women, we jeopardize not fully understanding the impact of this policy and overlooking how policing really works, how the court systems really work, and what people really need and what they have been doing in order to mitigate the harm and transform what has become normalized ways of being in the world. Despite being just 6% of the US population by the early 1990s, African American women constituted nearly half of the women prisoners, half of the women behind bars. By 2020, nearly 5 decades after former President Nixon declared a war on drugs to undercut anti-war, civil rights, Black power, women's and LGBTQ organizing, Black women are still being incarcerated at nearly twice the rate of white women. Now, if you can see the slides, you'll notice that in the last, since 2015, there's been a dramatic decrease in the number of folks behind bars. Number of women in particular. It's actually a national trend. Part of the reason for that is there was a court decision that ordered California alone to end overcrowding in their facility. And since California has the highest number of people behind bars, anything that happens in California impacts national numbers. And so some of that decrease you see is due to that. Also between 2020 and today, we're seeing the impact of some changes in policy in response to the COVID epidemic. But today those numbers are beginning to rise again. This change, the slope from 1970 to the high at about, this is just the numbers for people in prison. It doesn't include the folks in jail. But this rise happens at the same time that there's actually a decline in the number of crimes being reported. So these numbers are not because women are more criminal, they're not more evil. There's a change in public policy that gets instituted that produces this increase. And it's, again, changes in public policy influence the decrease. We'll see which way this goes. Hopefully it'll continue to go down. But that's decisions that we have to make as a country. So at the high point, most recent high point of the war on drugs, there were about 210,000 women behind bars, a combination of state, federal prisons, and in the jail system. But that's not everybody who's locked up. The number of girls has also been rising. It's skyrocketing. 34% of youth placed in placement or behind bars for status offenses are girls. They're locked up for things like running away. That's a status offense, meaning that you're in trouble because a little kid, a young lady can't be on their own, they can't run away. You're supposed to be under parental control or the control of an institution. So the fact that you've decided to, quote unquote, run away or leave makes you an offender. Truancy, so not being at school, curfew violations, these are all status offenses. Not being at school, come on. If you're an adult, no one worries about that. I mean, I worry about my students who are not in schools, but I'm not calling the police on you, right? If you're out after curfew as an adult, nobody's calling the police on you. But if you're under 18, there's a different set of rules that apply. So, and unfortunately, girls are being incarcerated for those status offenses in large numbers. Today, there's over 79 million people who have a family member who's been directly impacted by the criminal legal system. And there are about 1 million women under some form of corrections control. So my book is interested in not only how the crisis of Black women's incarceration arose, but really what women have been doing about it. And in thinking about and researching it, I stumbled across rehabilitation programs for women that included the arts. Now, as a theater person, I got very excited about this. And I'll be happy to talk about why I do theater later on. But in the archive, I was curious about, well, why is it that people do theater with women behind bars? When I started this project, I really I guess I thought more literally about, like, what do people eat behind bars? If you're there for crimes of poverty, if you're there because you shoplifted something from Target, you engaged in sex work, you're struggling with an addiction, how is theater going to make any difference? And what I came to understand is that in the carceral system, that as Ashley Lucas describes, prisoner rehabilitation is basically a three-step process. 1, confess. 2, express remorse. And 3, comply with officers' orders. So if they tell you you're going to do a blackface minstrelsy play at like the Colored Ladies Political Club, which was performed in Auburn, part of the Auburn prison complex in New York City in the early 1900s, then you're going to do it. Why? Because the more good time you can build, the better the conditions are of confinement for you. And there might even be a chance that someone will help you get out. But this, for me, knowing that this was one of many programs offered, I wondered, well, what is it that, what are they asking women to comply with? Is it just the play, or is there something else going on? Because the history of incarceration in this country is about confining, shaping, regulating, surveilling, not only the people of color, of Black people, but it's also about regulating gender and sexuality. And so my journey throughout the last 10, 15 years of this work has been to try and understand what, if any, role the arts play in the understanding the so-called rehabilitation. What do we mean by rehab? And how are women actually using the arts programs? So this is an image of Parchment Farm's sewing room, a space where in Mississippi in the 1930s, a group of women got together and they sang songs. They made up songs about the blues songs, about their experiences that really challenged the dominant narratives. And I would argue, and I argue, the kind of race and gender programming that they are being forced to adhere to through blackface minstrelsy shows like The Colored Suffragettes being performed behind bars. And the blues, through the blues, women can express the otherwise unexpressible. They can articulate their dissent from gender norms and expectations. They can call out men. They can express their desire for each other and for other modalities to emerge in ways that were not available through other mechanisms. The arts, I realized with time, continue to be instrumental to Black women's anti-prison organizing. This is an image of a campaign built in the mid-1970s to free a woman called Joanne Little. She survived a rape in a small jail in North Carolina, and she survived it by killing the corrections officer who attacked her and then running away. He did pass, though, and she was eventually brought to trial. A broad coalition of prisoners' rights, women's rights, prisoner advocates came together to ultimately to fight for her freedom. And key to that process was a song that Sweet Honey in the Rock crafted and sang at her rallies. It became a kind of an anthem for the community. I think in all this time, though, up until now, I've been really just talking about the history of what people have done. My book is a combined history and ethnography. And one of the things that I learned from working with women behind bars is that they believe in the role of the arts and theater in particular as a practice to stage healing, which I define as establishing the conditions for individual and communal self-repair, drawing upon Black expressive cultural practices. And we're gonna talk a lot more about that. Here are a couple images of my sites, though. So again, pseudonym, but that's what a gel pod looks like. So people are locked in on both levels, and then there's a central space, a central meeting space. So that's where my project began. But I'm going to pause here, and shall we sit down and talk about the book and the practice of doing ethnography behind bars and what it means to stage healing? Okay, thank you.
So I am honored to be here to bring this one out into
Help
the
me,
world.
thank you.
So I actually want to start with you open talking about this Colored Ladies Political Club, which I just went down a rabbit hole.
Oh no!
When I read about it, yeah. Can you just talk a little bit more about the production, the aims of it, the politics of it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a work of blackface minstrelsy, and it's a rare, short, it's maybe 20-minute piece. It's a very short play, huge cast of like 9, 10, 12 people, but for all women, which was very unusual in terms of blackface minstrelsy. That usually a male-dominated genre, but this one, long story short, there's the premise is that there's this low-income black woman who's decided to run for mayor of her town again. And she's gathering some friends together in her living room for a fundraiser. In order to prepare, though, she enlists her building superintendent, who has like a very long name, George Washington Horatio, to help her out and play like a doorman. When the ladies arrive, each one of them has kind of a unique, I guess, characteristic it's a short work, so you have to introduce people quickly. So some of them, they're awkwardly dressed. They think that they have great style. Others sit down at the piano, and it becomes clear they cannot sing. So, but they're there, we think, to support her. But it quickly becomes clear that they're actually more interested in like ribbing each other, tearing each other down, than to listen to this woman's stump speech. And her speech is really about how it's time for women who are working as domestics to rise up, to get fair wages. The backdrop of this is that it happens, in the Women's March in Washington, D.C. Is a backdrop for this. This is before black women get the vote, long before, and white women don't have the vote either. And in reading the script, I was really drawn to this image of white women on stage, dressed as black women, organizing for voting rights and for the possibility of holding public office at a time in which women could not do that, and black women definitely could not do that. And so I wondered really, what is the play doing in the world? And it occurred to me that it's buffooning the possibility of black women's political organizing, and that in a prison setting, it's being used to really teach women their place, that they don't have, that the idea of women's political organizing, black, white, or any kind, is preposterous. It is the object of a joke and ridicule. And that for people in the audience who were a mixed group, correctional facilities have always been in the U.S. Where there are, it's always majority minority people. So if it's in areas where it's predominantly Native people, it's mostly Native people. And urban areas like would have fed the Auburn facility in upstate New York, it would be predominantly black people. So very likely at Auburn, when this performance happened, there was a mixed audience of black and white women. And I know from the records of the state prison that the people who were confined there was an almost equal number of black and white women and a couple of indigenous people as well. So it's very likely that they would have been in the audience. And to me, what the show communicates is not only the impossibility of women entering into the public sphere as political actors, but that they should never, ever collaborate in order to gain political rights, in order to vote or to shift social and public policy. Because blackface minstrelsy is deeply offensive as a performance form. It was until very recently, unfortunately, one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the U.S., but it still continues to ghost and haunt our entertainment industry with varying degrees of success and legibility. But I thought to myself, if I was a Black woman sitting in this audience watching this play mock buffoon the possibility of me getting political rights, how would I have felt? And so that's what I think that the script is doing. It's communicating to women sitting there that they need to comply with the white supremacist and gendered social order of the United States in order to survive behind bars. And then that preparation will enable them to succeed in life on the outside.
And so it's art as disciplining?
Art as a disciplinary practice, absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then you use that, like this moment, this play, and the ideas of performing discipline, like art, as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
To make a turn toward this term that you stage healing, right? Like to use this moment where wounds are potentially exposed by people who are having to watch it, to then talk about how that led you to coin this term about the stage healing, the stage as a healing space. Can you just kind of unpack that term a little bit and talk to us about the work that it's doing in your work and just in the world?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I really have to credit the women, the ensembles, the teaching artists who work with women behind bars for unpacking this idea for me. As a theater person, the kind of theater that I have done, I have often described theater as like life-affirming and liberatory and even a healing practice, because there's something about working with other people that makes many of us feel whole and present and seen and heard and understood in a really impactful way. So this is not the kind of theater that's like driven by selling things, or it's not celebrity culture. It's really a kind of a theater that has like a sense of ritual and a seriousness to it that may also happen in your big productions of whatever, but in small spaces, it's the kind of work that happens all the time. But like I said in my opening remarks, that I was really thinking when I started, like, well, what are we healing through theater? You know, we can't end if the causes of women's incarceration are poverty, and about poverty, about racism and sexism, drug addiction. What is theater doing with that? And so hanging out, critically hanging out with these ensembles, 4 of them, 3 in the United States, 1 in South Africa, I learned by going to workshops week after week, year after year, that the theater programs were not functioning as a disciplinary practice like the colored suffragettes, the minstrel show did. That instead, these small groups of women were gathering together under the pretext of, oh, we're just going to do a show. It's just theater. Don't worry about it. You know, the ladies are just playing and doing some serious work. They, unlike the colored suffragettes, they used the time together in order to tell their own stories about their own lives. And week after week, when I went to workshops, I realized over time that the story that they really wanted to tell was about surviving domestic violence and sexual assault. Oftentimes things that had occurred when they were young children, less than 13 years old. But these were stories that no one had believed them if they told, and stories that no one had offered them any support to understand, to process, to grieve, and to heal from. And so, especially in jail sites where people are in and out and in and out, there is a deep need for safety and security it's one of the worst days of your life. You don't know where your kids are. You don't know when you're getting out. You are afraid, especially if you're new. And going to drama club, the word would get passed that if you go into drama club, that you could tell even that story if you wanted to. That we would not compel you to confess. We were not interested in you are expressing remorse and some kind of evidence of like you're being rehabilitated. And because we are not officers, we're not giving you any orders. We invited you into a process of thinking about the present or whatever you wanted to talk about. And that invitation alone for many people was enough to like really open up a conversation amongst women in the room about what they had lived through, what they had witnessed, and what they needed. And none of that was part of the rehabilitative script. That they were, if anything, undisciplined in those moments. They really refused the ways that the system tried to characterize and to regulate and discipline them to behave. We figured out, and I really learned from the people who ran the programs, how to listen and hear and hold their stories. And what I learned is that by going to sites, prisons and jails in which these are the stories that want to be told, or other stories about surviving life behind bars, about being a mother, 80% of women behind bars, more than that, are mothers to small children who they're trying to parent over distance and time. That there were, what I learned is that women really were dying to tell these stories, and that they needed to use the theater. The theater was the only space in which they could tell them and be seen and be heard, be believed, be understood, and be witnessed in a really powerful way. And so when I talk about healing or staging creating the conditions for self-repair, what I learned is that these theater companies do just that. They create containers, spaces, exercises, opportunities for women to reflect upon the past and share it. Healing, they taught me, is a practice, yes, of self-repair, but one that does not happen separate and apart from community. That we need people to help us heal, to help us regulate our emotions, to help us understand, interpret our lives, to help us reframe the things that have happened to us. For those women who had never had anyone believe them when they told the story about how someone had sexually assaulted them. I mean, it may seem like a little thing that I'm a grad student, I'm sitting here in this room, you use a prompt about ice cream or a picket fence or whatever it was, and out of it comes a story about surviving a sexual assault. They seem like a small thing that I witnessed your story, that I and the program facilitators witness your story, and that we, with the other women, hold it. But it was often the first time that anyone had been seen or heard or believed. And so doing that in theater alleviated the sense of loneliness. It affirmed women's reality, their understanding of their own experiences. And, so the question that often comes up is, well, why did you believe them? Aren't they a bunch of liars and convicts? And, honestly, I don't know anybody who's ever lied about that, surviving a sexual assault personally. I think there's no reason. There was never a reason for them to mischaracterize their experiences with us, because we had no control over their time, how they would spend their time, their release, their court dates, none of it, and they knew it from the beginning. We were there to listen to whatever the story was or stories that they wanted to tell. And if they needed to fictionalize it to tell the truth, that was fine, because it's theater. And we're always working in the world of truth and the imaginary. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Here's what I heard.
Okay.
That healing is about truth and the imaginary being listened to and heard.
Yes.
That's what is taking place with some of the theater you participated in. So
Definitely,
that's stage healing.
Yeah, that what I learned from them is that, I was definitely raised to think about healing as being from a Western kind of medical framework in which we're talking about a cure of symptoms. And that healing activates relationships between and amongst people. That healing is about the emotional as well as the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual. And that is the kind of work, the seas that these theater programs that I research are swimming in. They want to touch people emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, as well as physically. We get up on our feet and we move to move energy, because movement returns people who have struggled with addiction, who have been deeply traumatized and hurt. It returns you momentarily to the body, and being able to be present in the moment is a core practice of the theater artist, to be present. It's also a practice that is necessary to heal. If you're struggling with PTSD, be it from a sexual assault or an accident, or just because you got overwhelmed as a kid when somebody yelled at you, being able to process that, you have to return to the self, to the body, and to time. And so I did not know this when I started the work, that they were thinking about healing in all these different registers. But that's what they taught me, and that's what I saw at work. People helping folks hold and recognize, tell their truth, and then be with them as they move through emotion, and then figure out ways of sharing that with the world if they wanted to.
So I love that. So that's very much about the work that art does, the work that theater in particular, with its asking you to be present. Mm-hmm. But this is art, unlike some that we are engaging right now. We're in a moment where prison art is circulating. Nicole Fleetwood has done such a fabulous job, really uplifting the idea of artists and incarcerated artists and what they do. What I find interesting about thinking about theater, this ephemeral kind of art, is it's art that's created in prison and is made to stay there. Mm-hmm. Like, you make it for that space and for the people there, not in some ways with some of the other, like, some of the work that we're seeing of the incarcerated that helps us to understand the practice of art making, but it's from an outside. But this is ephemeral. Like, this is about those moments, I think, as I hear you talk about them, and they stay there and they resonate there. So I'm wondering if you can just talk to us a little bit about your experience of entering some of these spaces, to go and stage heal. Like, you're walking through these doors with these ideas of what can happen in spaces that want to deny healing and humanity. What was it like for you to make art in prison that was to stay prison, to participate in helping people make that art?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, people who are making theater in carceral spaces know that the primarily audience is other people at the facility. In the United States, there's very few opportunities for non-incarcerated people or for corrections officers or for vetted volunteers to see the work. I think that many ensembles, though, would love for these plays to get published and seen in the world and for other people to do them. But in the meantime, I was definitely privileged to be one of the few people who worked with ensembles as they move from like the idea phase into rehearsal production and then to performance, and then started those cycles again, or because my access varied by site, to be able to just go and see a show, a singular performance of the only performance of the show in some cases. And I'll say that, be it the jail or prison in the US or South Africa, walking into prison is, in the words of a young poet, a walk in grief, the it's always a lot many people's worst days. The officers are on guard. I learned how to joke with some of them, which may, sound odd to some people, but I believe in the power of humor to shift relationships. And so sometimes I would sign in, and the officer at the front desk would be, snarky, tired. I don't know what their problem was, but they would look at me like, drama club, why they need drama? And what I learned to say is like, y'all got drama, please. You got drama. You got drama in here. All I'm doing is directing it. So doing things like that, ease like the tension. I'd signal to the officer that I understood, like you have an art. This is a tough job. It's a great job for someone with a high school diploma, maybe a couple years of associate's degree. Great paying job, fabulous benefits. But it is walk-in grief for them too every day. And it's a site where, we're not rehabilitating people to like transform you into a loving human being when you come out. They're meant to deprive you. You're deprived of your liberty. The food is crap. The conditions are horrible. It's too hot, it's too cold, everything is gray. It is designed to be depressing, and it is designed to torture. You're meant to be deprived of your liberty, but also for all your senses to be shocked by the terrible, by the horribleness of the conditions. And they are always horrible. So I learned how to, with time, I could prepare myself to do that walk from the lobby to wherever the program room was. And then the amazing thing about theater programs is that as soon as you close the door, so oftentimes there's no officer watching except by CCTV camera or whatever, but they let us do workshops indirectly supervised. And as soon as you close the door, click, the teaching artists changed the energy. And so there was a sense of, I think good teachers do this everywhere, but they say to people, hey, how you doing? It's so great to see you. And mean it. Come on over here, make a circle. I want to hear what's happened this week. I want to know. So I learned that, good teaching looks the same everywhere. And so in a carceral facility, you do those exact same things that you would in any other classroom. You don't ever forget where you are, because you can't forget completely where you are. But for a little while, some of the worst deprivation can be suspended because we treat each other like human beings, like full human beings who deserve to be seen, heard, and understood and respected. And so in doing that, you gain the respect of the participants. No theater program, no program's going to run behind bars unless you have buy-in from the participants, as well as officers. You got to manage those relationships with officers and with wardens and administrators and stuff. But you're really not going to have a program if you don't treat people who come to your workshop with respect. So while you're in workshop, there's a lot of joy, and then you have to reverse your path. And that was always the hardest thing for me, the leaving and knowing that if you're in a jail, you may or may not see people again. So figuring out how to say goodbye, or I'll see you next time, or like, I hope I don't see you here for real. So I hope you're all right. And people who were doing long stretches, long bids in prison, how to say to them, like, take care of yourself. I'll see you next time, or I'll see you in a couple weeks if there was going to be a break. But then reversing that was the hardest part, the walking out. I learned how to walk in and to be in, but walking out was always, I had to reground myself. Sometimes I just sat in my car and cried, or one place I worked, I used to go to, there was this really kind of crappy McDonald's, but I would go there. Their hot chocolate machine and the shake machine were always broken, so that's why they were subpar. But I would get some fries and a drink in order to have something sweet in my life again for a moment. So that's not in the book, but yeah, I used to do that, definitely. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm okay. Yeah.
So we're talking about theater, and reading your bio and just knowing you, I know how central theater and performance, not the intellectual engagement with performance studies, but I know by walking by your classrooms that your students often are engaged in movement. You're just like, get up, move around, like engage the world. And then, let's engage the intellect in certain kinds of ways. Or I know the ways that you bring art and theater into all kinds of intellectual discussions in work. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little more about how it came to be so. How did theater, did it find you? Did you find it? Did this project have anything to do with it? Were you already a devotee of theater before? Yeah, how'd y'all make each other's acquaintance?
Oh, well, it's the long short story is I was a super shy kid on the south side of Chicago in the 80s and 90s, and sometime around 6th grade, me and a friend double dog dared ourselves to audition for a play called The Diary of Adam and Eve. Shout out to the University of Chicago Lab School, John Beiser, the director. I was a novice performer, so I was cast as one of the animals in the garden. But that's fine. It was.
Which animal?
We got to pick our own. Why did I decide to be a hippo? I don't know. I wanted to be a hippopotamus, something African. I don't know. So there I am. But I also was assigned to be the understudy to the fourth Eve. So they divided the roles of Adam and Eve into 4 parts across 4 people. And so, do you know that the girl who was the fourth Eve got mono 2 weeks before the show? So I was like, okay, Mr. Beiser came up to me. He was like, can you do it? I was like, we're going to find out. Yes.
From hippo to Eve.
Hippo to Eve, exactly. So I learned my lines. The moment comes, I play my hippo role, and then I step off stage, and I change my T-shirt from one that says nothing to one that says Eve. And then I stepped on the stage, and I swear to you, I totally entered flow. I had no sense of the passage of time or space, but I felt fully and completely myself for the first time, and I think ever, in a way, certainly in a way that I had never felt fully myself in space and in time. And then I said all the lines, all the things happen, blah, blah, blah. Eventually, we get to the last moment. We all go for the bow, and that's when my sense of flow ended. And I realized, like, I have to do that again. I have to figure out a way of doing that again. And so it's been like this continuous journey to figure out, how do I get to do that again? Theater kids get mischaracterized as all kinds of geeks and misfits, but in our geeky misfitness, there is this deep sense of respect in programs that really do this well. There isn't that sense of like tear you down, competition that gets so often talked about. But theater programs that really care about kids create vessels for them to double dog dare themselves to do more than they think is possible. And when I became a teaching artist at the Living Stage Theater Company in Washington, D.C. in the late 90s, early 2000s, I got reintroduced to a practice of making work from scratch through improv, something that I had learned in college, but then set aside to go to auditions at Arena Stage and all these other places, which was good work, and I appreciated it. And I learned so much by being in the show business. But I believe in making theater that does the work in community. That's where I get my juices flowing. That's where I connect. And so Living Stage helped me reconnect to my own creative juices, and I got to witness people, especially this group of women in a comprehensive drug and alcohol recovery program called Crossing the River, take theater and poetry, song and dance, and save their own lives every day. They told stories through poetry, song, dance, movement, and improv about what they had lived and witnessed, often fictionalized, but we were primarily a group of Black women in that space. And they taught me more about being a Black woman than any other like workshop, group, reading to this day. Because what they taught me was that things that I had witnessed, that I had seen in my life, for me and amongst my friends, that we were not alone. That what we'd actually seen, what we'd experienced was something that was very common to Black women. And so when I talk about stage healing, or the healing stage, it's really about stage healing, that performance spaces that allow you to tap into, recognize your vulnerability, and then don't leave you there. That's the kind of theater that keeps me going every day. And it's the kind of theater that I hope that my students get to touch on. I mean, I can't reproduce the context of Crossing the River or Living Stage now, but since Living Stage closed in 2001, a group of us have spread like rhizomes, and we are determined to share that practice because we believed then, and I still do, that there should be a company, a theater on every street corner in every community across the nation, because we need to make art and we need to tell our own stories, because we understand ourselves. We can imagine a future and we can do it. We must do it together. And so that's how theater got me. It keeps getting me. I love making art with people. That's about things you're not going to see it on Broadway. You're not going to see it on the regional theater. You're not. You might get a hint, a ghost, a taste, but you're probably not gonna. I love making work with people 3 to 103. You're not going to see them. So that's why when I went to, actually the impetus for the book lies at Living Stage, at this program, Crossing the River, the comprehensive drug and alcohol program that brought women, not for therapy, but to make art with us. That is the impetus for the book. The group of them stabilized in recovery. And when I had the chance to, when I was looking out for case studies, I reached back to those women. And I discovered that they were teaching what I was an assistant at that time. So when they were at Living Stage, I was an assistant. I did not lead workshops, but they were teaching the things that our teacher, Rebecca Rice, had taught them, but at their local jail. And so, including things that I had forgotten that we used to do, but were so meaningful to them. And so when I met them, I said, I want to understand why you call this healing work. Then they told me, one of them, a woman named Rosetta, she told me a story that I don't remember if it's in the book, but she said to me, this is how impactful that work was to them. She said that one day, Rebecca told us all to write a poem about something, and I don't remember this at all. But it was my job that day to pass out the pens and the papers, so I go around the circle, here you go, here you go, here you go. And people used to say to me and all of us at Living Stage every day, I cannot write a poem. They would grab us like, I can't write a poem, I can't do it. So afraid. So I was used to saying people, yes, you can. You can write a poem. All you have to do is pick up the paper and the pen and begin, and then let's see what happens. And then I would move on to the next person, because there's like 30 people in the workshop. So here you go. I say that however many times. Well, Rosetta heard me say that. Yes, you can. You can write a poem. All you have to do is pick up the paper and the pen and begin. And she really took that to heart in a way that I did not understand until a decade later. She picked up that pencil and the pen and she began to write. And do you know, not only did she write a poem that day, but I remember this, that she became the resident poet of that group. She came with poetry, spitting fire every week for months and months and months. And what I didn't know after I left Living Stage and our collaboration with that group ended was that she kept writing every day, every week, every month for the next decade. So when I popped up like, hey, I'd love to hang out with y'all and see what you do at your local jail, whatever, that she was like, Lisa, I remember you. I didn't remember their names, right? It's been a decade. I did a lot of workshops with a lot of people. So she was like, she's like, Lisa, I remember you. You're the reason that I'm a poet. I did not know. I did not know.
You're a healer. It's not the stage that's a healer, it's Lisa Biggs. I'm serious. You're laughing. I'm dead serious. You are a healer, and you were told that you were a healer. So we're almost at the point where we want to open it up, but let me know what do you want to leave people with? What do you want the one thing that you want the folks online and in the room to take away from this universe of ideas, from healing and theater and stage and incarceration and the book? What do you want us to know?
I think, a message that I was charged with from the women that I worked with is one of the messages that I was charged with sharing was that we are not meeting people's needs through the current systems, but they are determined to transform themselves in the world. So when people say things like defund the police, it's because they understand that the current system does not serve anyone. It puts money into the hands of a very few people at the expense of the needs of many. So that may not happen. We may not defund the police. We may not reorient those resources towards something else. But women need, and they are going to do this work for themselves and for others. And they're going to do it at great cost, in some cases, to themselves. They refuse to walk around in pain, and they need access to other resources. And the theater, in many sites, is the only resource that is available to them that enables them to heal. No, I don't want to see like the response to the war on drugs is that we just have a bunch of theater programs in all the prisons and jails. Like, that's not the answer. We want to not have to deal with this, period. If people had the resources that they needed, they wouldn't have been stealing Pampers from Target. They wouldn't have been engaged in the drug trade, transatlantic or local. They wouldn't be mules. And if someone had actually believed girls when they ran away because someone assaulted them, and gotten them the help that they need, whatever that looks like, right? Whatever that looks like, none of us would have been sitting in jail with them or in prison with them. A big thing that theater teaches you to do is not only to tap into your own story and tell your own stories, but to believe the still small voice within you and to regulate your emotions, to process your emotions, to breathe with people, and to be with yourself and to be with other people. And it is sacred. It is truly sacred work. There's a group of theater artists. I hope that I have earned the right to call myself amongst them, that we are going to do that work and we are not going to stop. And we want other people to get in on the fun and the goodness, because we're going to keep doing it. There is no money in it. There is no money in it, but we doing it because we deserve it. We deserve a more fair, a more just, and more equitable world where women's lives are valued, period. And we're getting there. We're making it happen by any means theatrically necessary, by any means necessary. But and in the meantime, without support in small spaces around the country and around the world, we're doing it because it's important and people need it. And we need each other. So women behind bars have stories to tell about what it means to live in the society that we need to hear.